the toppling basis of past prosperity. Is the British economy now in a state of terminal decline? Are we faced with the prospect of lapsing into genteel poverty? Certainly, the monuments of the past had a sense of permanent dominance that reflected the creative business of the greatest workshop in the world. Very different from the popular images of enterprise that prevail today. There's no shortage of diagnosis of the British economic disease. Slack management. Wrong products for the wrong markets. Work-shy labour. Concern has mostly been focused on the state of British manufacturing industry, on which our prosperity was largely based. And it's certainly true that manufacturing has, over the last 4 decades, been providing jobs for a smaller proportion of the total workforce. 20 years ago, about 1 in 3 worked in manufacturing. Now, it's about 1 in 4. But so what? After all, in 1850, a very large percentage of the workforce were engaged in agriculture, the primary sector of the economy. Manufacturing, secondary production, occupied relatively few, and the rest were involved in tertiary or service sector, domestic service, retailing, the professions. As the economy developed, the number working in primary production fell dramatically, although agricultural output continued to rise, and more workers became absorbed in the manufacturing sector. Similarly, today, and it's true of other advanced economies, not just Britain, as they become still richer, a greater proportion of the working population is switched into the output of tertiary services like entertainment or tourism, because in an affluent society, that's what consumers increasingly spend their money on. Consider the tale of 2 bridges just a few miles apart, Sowerby Bridge and Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire. From a tiny agricultural hamlet in the 17th century, Hebden Bridge had been transformed 200 years later into a flourishing, busy manufacturing town. The source of its prosperity? Textiles, with a ready market for the cheaper cloths called mungo and shoddy, which were made up into workers' clothes. A solid base, then, for a prosperity that lasted for almost 3 centuries, the result of ready water power and later easy transport of coal along the canals. 10 miles away, Sowerby Bridge developed along similar lines, with work for everyone in the new mills built close to the water, which provided power and a cheap route from the Humber to the Mersey. The woolen industry, together with heavy engineering, thrived until competition from abroad and new products forced them into decline, with the worst periods of contraction being the 1930s and the 1960s. The recent history of Sowerby Bridge is one long obituary column.
Well, we are talking about the wharf mill at Sowerby Bridge. And then, of course, there's the CWS flour mill, which, you know, the heavily industrialised area. There was quite a lot of people employed there. That was burnt down, but it was an inevitable closure. Then there's the Clays at Hollins Mill, Greenwoods at Hollins Mill. There was Humphreys, which just closed down, Watson Mill, which was burnt down, but they were going to close. And Morris's, of course, had a sad loss about 2 years ago when they announced they were going to pull out of the Sowerby Bridge area. Permanent closure.
In Sowerby Bridge and surrounding areas, no fewer than 50 mills had been closed since 1955, with a more than 40% loss of jobs. Sowerby Bridge has slid inexorably into being an industrial backwater.
I think one of the worst declines, of course, when the railway goods yard shut down about 1963, something like that, when the Clean Air Act was coming in.
At its peak, the yard was handling some 20 trainloads of freight a day. Now the road haulage firm that's taken over the old site employs only 17 workers, very different from the previous bustling activity.
You see, when you look over there now, you see the... Where am I? You see the clock tower there, the little tower with the clock on? We used to have a big picture house there. Then with the picture house on the other side, which was the Asaldo. Further up the hill, we had a dance hall, and it's all gone. Everything's gone, we've nothing at all.
What do young people do here for jobs, then?
Well, there isn't anything. There's nothing for them at all. I mean, they go and sign on a Monday, and then they're sat on the wall outside the Asaldo place, and they've nothing at all to do. It's a great pity. There's nothing for them in Sober Bridge.
There's no jobs for no one unless they've got qualifications. I've written off to a load of places, and I've never had any replies from them.
No, just mess around at Cool all day.
At first sight, it's the same story at Hebden Bridge, also beset by a seemingly endless series of textile closures.
The closures have come this last few years, and it's been, well, it's terrible in Hebden Bridge. It's unbelievable the number of places that have closed down. You start to count, you can count a lot.
The same decaying mills and warehouses reflect the decline of a once great industry. But here the tale of the two towns begins to diverge, because here in Hebden Bridge were some like Philip Round with a positive view of how the dying town could be saved.
Well, it was in this period of decline at the time, and people wondered what on earth the future did hold. Everywhere around was declining, the population was dropping, services were being reduced, so on, and people really saw no option, and they began to move out of the district, and the population began to plummet.
But you're claiming something of a success story for Hebden Bridge now. How's that come about?
Well, it was deliberately decided a few years ago to try and pursue a three-pronged policy for the future of the town, to develop the tourist assets that the area has, the fine countryside, the history and the character of the district, to encourage people to come and live in the district by renovating old properties and so on, and to continue encouraging small-scale industries in the town which could provide employment for relatively few people in each individual case, but in total could provide an important industrial base for the town and the community as a whole.
Firms like Cowrick, giving work for 56 employees, most of whom had previously lost their jobs in the textile industry, now producing sophisticated recording equipment.
Particularly on the microphone side, we're competing with the best in the world, and successfully.
Well, how is it that such a small unit as this is able to put in the research and so on?
Principally because a lot of the big boys don't really employ the research facilities that they have to the full. We design and redesign on a constant basis, whereas they tend to make a product, mass produce it in large quantities, which means they can't, of course, keep changing it. We're a small unit, we can adapt and change to meet modern technology.
Another new enterprise is an Arab stud farm, home of the famous White Horse in the whisky advertisements. Attached to it is the Shasco Limited Workshop, where leather and textile skills now cater for the needs of the members of the Pony Club and readers of the Horse and Hound. Some leisure-related industry, some high technology, but neither providing major employment. The main way in which Hebden Bridge has adapted better than Sowerby Bridge is in making itself a place to be visited, where visitors can spend money. Old buildings have been put to new use. Over the past decade, Hebden Bridge has developed a significant tourist industry with up to 2,000 visitors a day. The information centre, opened in 1974, dealt then with some 8,000 inquiries. Last year, there were nearly 42,000. Hebden Bridge is earning a name as an attractive centre for touring the moors and the dales.
Americans, Canadians, French, Swiss, Germans, mostly foreign people. It's amazing, isn't it?
And do they come back again?
Yes, we've had the Americans. They came again this year. We've had some people from Saffron Walden. They've come again.
The stream of spenders in the high street has meant, for example, that John Austin has found it worth opening a sports shop. He'd emigrated to find work in Saudi Arabia and then heard that Hebden Bridge was on the up again.
So my boys said it's time he came home, Dad, and opened a sports shop. There isn't one in Hebden Bridge, and we think it offers good potential.
And how do you find it now, then? Has Hebden Bridge improved?
It has, enormously. The tourist trade and interest locally for sport in general and leisure, I think is second only to eat and drink.
And that's another market that's now been tapped.
We get quite a lot of local businessmen. We're in quite a good catchment area, again, around the whole valley. Lots of people just come in, they see our adverts. And then basically tourists, we get Americans, Canadians.
Is there much of a coach trade?
Yes, there's coaches go to several factories around here, clog factory, and they come here for the supper on the way home.
You knew Hebden Bridge a few years ago, presumably. You come from this sort of area. What was it like then? Would you have moved in that time?
No, well, I come from Burnley originally, and I just associated it as any other mill town, you know, nothing to do with tourism. It was a surprise when we actually came to investigate the area.
In 1975, there were only 3 places you could get bed and breakfast in Hebden Bridge. Now there are more than 55. The town has replaced its traditional reliance on textiles by catering for people's new demands for leisure and enjoyment. Hebden Bridge lives again. So, is this the lesson to be learned in the economy as a whole? To accept that Britain's economic future lies not so much in manufacturing as in the production of services of one kind or another. After all, banking and finance, supplying expertise, as in civil engineering, pomp and circumstance for the tourists, these are the sort of things we've always been good at. So why should we worry about producing less cars, steel, television sets and the like? Well, this can eat away at our prosperity in 3 ways. By hitting at jobs, at taxes to pay for public services, and at our ability to pay our way internationally, if these aren't offset by a corresponding rise in tertiary production. If labour disgorged by the manufacturing sector isn't absorbed by service industries, then it simply becomes unemployed. A crumbling of jobs representing a dreadful economic waste, quite apart from the fact that it's humanly and socially intolerable. And that recently is just what's been happening. Between 1975 and 1982, for example, some 1,800,000 jobs have been lost in manufacturing. And there's been an increase in unemployment of more than 2 million. Second, there are taxes to worry about. Less manufacturing means less government revenue from income and corporation tax, VAT and so on. Now, this wouldn't matter if it were made up by the tax yield from a greater output of services sold on the market, things like banking and entertainment. But if that's not happening, then government finds it difficult to pay even for existing non-marketed services like the NHS or state education, let alone expand them to compensate for the fall in manufacturing employment. And third, there's the balance of payments to consider. At one time, our main pattern of trade was to export manufactures and import food and raw materials. But we now also import large amounts of manufactures too, nearly as much as we export. We still have an export surplus on manufactures, but it's contributing less and less towards paying for the £5 billion bill for the imports of food and raw materials we need. Net invisible exports of services aren't rising fast enough to make up the difference, and of course when the oil runs out, the position will be still worse. Three interpretations of deindustrialization, all a matter for concern. And some say that recent policies aimed at squeezing out inflation through monetarist measures have accelerated the process of deindustrialization and possibly even made it irreversible. As we've just seen, there's certainly been a massive fall in manufacturing employment. And in the past few years, there's also been a sharp decline in manufacturing output. Public sector services haven't been able to absorb those made unemployed because public sector spending has been deliberately held back. And manufactured exports now hardly pay for our imports of manufactures, let alone essential supplies of foodstuffs and raw materials. Moreover, the adverse conditions that have caused the manufacturing sector to shrink are hardly likely to encourage a switch of resources into the tertiary service sector. Look, for example, at the case of Hornsey Pottery in North Yorkshire, a well-established producer of high-quality crockery, up-to-date, productive, profitable. But in recent years, it's been switching from the secondary to the tertiary sector. Not into house building, but into the leisure industry. It seemed a good idea to turn a shopping expedition into an afternoon's outing for the whole family. It all began from very humble origins.
The nature of the Yorkshire people is one of being extremely welcoming. And in the early days of the business in Yorkshire, the leisure retail was not in existence, but in fact being very close to the coast and very many people coming for a holiday in Hornsey, they found their way to our very small pottery and discovered that apart from the door being open for them to come and see the process being made, there was a very charming lady next door who was quite prepared to make them cups of tea. And this sort of led on to us becoming a little more attuned to the circumstances, and these facilities grew with an equal balance of facilities like cafes with children's zoos, and we grew from there on.
But then the balloon burst and Hornsey found themselves faced with a combination of declining demand and high interest rates.
Yes, regretfully, interest rate came at a time when we had forward plans to develop our leisure parks, and we had a third unit well positioned in the Midlands, but it's very wise under circumstances, if you have a fair project, to evaluate the potential risk of investment. We put the idea on ice, but we intend to come back to this immediately once the recession's over.
Here, in of all places, Sowerby Bridge, is an example of what others see as the benefit of recent policies, the creation of a leaner, fitter industry better able to compete. The old established clothing firm of Longbottom did modernise and has survived, albeit at the cost of a much reduced workforce.
I'm concerned, to be honest. I have seen such a savage decline that to come out of this recession in Sowerby Bridge, that is essentially textile-based, would need a great deal of investment in other industries. Probably the industries that would be investment industries would not employ a lot of people, so I think it will be a great struggle to invite companies into this area and give them any confidence to be here.
Well, some people would say that this epitomises the economy as a whole, the decline in manufacturing.
I think this is probably very true. It's unfortunate that the north of England, which has worked so hard and suffered so many traumas, gets the dark satanic mill image of an area, which Sowerby Bridge undoubtedly has. But it would be difficult to attract investment into Sowerby Bridge in particular, I think.
So even while broadly supporting government policy, firms like Longbottom's are highly critical of the desperate pressures they've had to face during these years of monetarism.
Well, indeed, I did say to Mrs. Thatcher in a letter that I would like her to come and run my company. She could take my seat and run my company under the conditions her administration had imposed. And she was very welcome to take it over and see whether she could cope with it.
Can you see any justification for that policy? I mean, the argument would be presumably that this was necessary to squeeze public spending in order to release resources for the private sector. Why weren't you taking advantage of the policy?
Yes, I accept this and I agree with her to some extent. Her ideas were right. My argument has always been that what was done far too quickly. This is not just my view, it's a CBI view. It's a view of a lot of industrialists that the medicine could very easily have killed the patient.
So why do you say the ideas were right when the ideas were high interest rates, a high pound, all the things that were damaging your business?
Well, to squeeze the inflation out of the economy and to get the fat out of the economy so that we were a lean and firm industrial base. And this, I think, is the right direction. But having said that, the cure was far, far too savage.